Really want to give a big welcome to Rob Rice. Rob Rice and I go back decades. He was working with me and Tom at Alternate Worlds Technology, where we created the first US manufactured virtual reality arcade system, second one in the world. We talked John Carmack out of his source code for Wolfenstein, made the reality rocket around that, realized it needed to be multiplayer, and made CyberTag just because we could, and we didn't know that was the first-person shooter that was multiplayer. Carmack and Wilbur came, jumped into that. We couldn't get them out of the machine for 4 hours, and the rest is history. Or Doom, as they call it. So I would like to welcome to the stage Robert Rice, old and dear friend.
So when I first met Andy, I was running my first business, which was a comic book store here in Louisville, Kentucky, actually. He walked in one day and said, "Hey, I'm doing this cool VR stuff. Do you mind if I run a little prototype here in your store to show people and see what they think?" And my first reaction was, "You have to ask. I mean, it's a comic book store. Bring it on in." And after a while, kind of getting to know him, he was trying to also get to know me and realized that I knew how to use a computer, which back in the early 90s, that was a pretty big deal. And I think that's probably why he ultimately hired me. But my experience at that point was mostly playing Zork and trying to pick up girls on CompuServe, in the off hours. Probably dating myself a bit, but anyway. So you guys have my slides up? Yay, here we go. Okay, so I know we're a little short in time. I'll try to be a little quick and hit you guys with some pretty high-level concepts. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the XR ecosystem and also explaining what XR means. Is there a clicker here? Where should I point this at? Oh, there we go. Yay. So this is me. I am an AR, augmented reality, and virtual reality, pioneer and kind of an early developer. I'm also the CEO of a startup in Raleigh, North Carolina called Transmira. And I founded the Augmented Reality Consortium in 2009. I pretty much called every company on the planet that was doing some sort of augmented reality technology that wasn't academic or defense and said, "Hey guys, there's a lot of real cool tech going on. Why don't we form a consortium, kind of share some notes, and try to bring our tech to the consumer industry?" And they were like, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's go grab some beers and talk." So yeah, that's how I got started in AR and made a bit of a name for myself there. So moving on, augmented reality, I'm sure everybody here has heard of it. If you haven't, where have you been hiding? And do you know what really wealthy people are saying about it? I have a few quotes here from CEOs of Apple, Facebook, and one of the co-founders from Wayfair, and a few other mind-numbing statistics. So last year, over $3 billion was invested in venture capital in both augmented reality and virtual reality, and half of that was done in the last quarter, which is just a bit of a number there. As far as the global market, those numbers are all over the map. I've seen anywhere from half of that to 5 times that in a couple of years. But the reality here is that AR and VR are changing things. They're very changing and disruptive sort of technologies to start with, even though they're still, they've been around for a long time, but they're also really new. They're very much nascent technologies that are still in the emerging sort of thing. But enough people now have kind of seen it or experienced it to some degree where it's not too hard identifying the possibilities, potential for the technology. The trick is trying to figure out how to make it applicable for use cases today, as well as struggling with some of the hardware requirements. But we're getting there. So what is XR? XR is a term I coined in early or mid 2014 because I got tired of telling people that I was doing AR and MR and VR and IoT, and I was like, I just need something, so let's go with the X, because X can be kind of anything. Now, of course, everybody's using the term XR, and it's got 1,000 different definitions, but I'm laying claim to having coined it. So in my case, it's an umbrella term for pretty much all of these technologies together. When you kind of deconstruct AR and VR and whatever, there's a lot of similarities. They all do 3D, and a lot of basic pieces are the same. Even though some of the modalities or the hardware you would use is different, there's enough that's similar where I think it makes for a very nice, kind of a continuum, I guess is a good way. So I like to use XR when I'm referring to two or more of these technologies together. And of course, when you look at the AR ecosystem, it's more than just computer vision and 3D graphics. It's pretty much everything else on the planet. Blockchain, Internet of Things, smart devices, artificial intelligence, artificial life, user interface design, data visualization, data fusion. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And when you look at all of these disparate technologies together underneath the umbrella of augmented and virtual reality, suddenly the potential for what they could do suddenly becomes huge, and it's way more than just experiencing stuff in 3D. There's a lot of amazing things you can do when you start viewing all of this as an ecosystem and trying to figure out how they all can work with and leverage each other. So if anybody here has seen Silicon Valley, yes, no? Or the conjoined triangles of success? Well, I have the conjoined polygons of success. Hopefully somebody out there gets my joke. So this is an important slide. So when you're combining these technologies, AR, VR, whatever, together underneath the umbrella of XR, it's important that you think about things as social, mobile, local, and virtual. These are all four very important and critical elements for making the most out of those technologies in terms of how you apply them somewhere. If you're leaving some of these out, you're going to end up with a novelty experience that has minimal usefulness and people will ultimately forget. The other thing that's important for moving forward with the industry as a whole and building out the XR ecosystem is identity, location, and commerce. And again, so many people in the industry are focused on the computer vision, the 3D, or the hardware. They're missing some of the underlying fundamental infrastructure pieces. So the industry, I think, in my mind, is very much like it was in 1992 or 1993 for the web. A lot of stuff is out there, but not a whole lot is really coming together yet. But these things are important, and I'm about to show you why. So first of all, awesome pictures. Combining everything together, this is where I like to tell people where the science and the magic, meet. We can make, awesome graphics do amazing things now, and we can make, cool technology look a lot better. So in the course of what I do with my startup and advising other technology companies and startups, I've kind of been looking for different technologies or use cases of technology that can build out kind of a global, ubiquitous sort of platform, kind of like the Matrix, whatever, but seamlessly blending from AR to VR and back with all of the other technology platforms that are in there. And many of those that I'm either developing or that I found, when you look at them in the context of what Andy's developing with Convergence, it's almost like it's an expansion or a growth of it way beyond what's possible with just games. Yeah, some of these pieces are just a little bit mind-blowing. I love to talk about them. And again, I apologize for talking fast. Sometimes I get really excited. So in one case, we have virtual goods. Everybody's familiar with virtual goods, 3D objects, currencies within games, and whatnot. One of the things that we've been looking at are virtual goods linked to real-world merchandise. If I walk around in my mobile phone and I find a 3D cup of Starbucks somewhere, what does it take to take that, be able to pick it up and go to a Starbucks and exchange or redeem it for a real-world cup of coffee? It has to be a unique object. It has to be tracked. It has to have a point of origin. It can't be a fraud or a copy. There's a lot of little technology pieces that go in there, but when you stitch them all together, you can go from an advertiser saying, here's my dollar for this ad spend, and we can track that all the way through to a transaction at a point of sale by tracking it in the blockchain and keeping track of its history, it's all the transaction pieces, straight across the board, which then allows them to kind of prove ROI. And at the same time, if we let people take that, the 3D Starbucks cup they found and create content with it, one of the risks we have with user-generated content in whether it's mobile games or very large, Oasis-type universes or an augmented reality or Second Life or whatever, is spam or just a whole lot of crap content that nobody likes. So we thought, okay, well, how do we take advantage of things like currencies and tokens and virtual goods and blockchain, all these other sort of pieces? We thought, how do we deal with that? And so we thought, well, why don't we try to monetize the idea of curation or moderation? So if I create some content and I share it with my friends, great, it's private. But what if I put it on a public layer for everybody to see? and then paid some coins or paid some energy or something that gave it a bit of a life cycle. And if people liked it, they could contribute to it, and it'll stay longer. And if people find it offensive or horribly designed, they can throw a couple of coins at it and make it shrink and kind of go away sooner, which does a lot of things. A, it makes everybody that's, creating content, now they have to make sure it's good, because otherwise their friends and buddies are just going to get rid of it. But the system will overall kind of self-moderate itself, and good content will stay and be there longer, and bad stuff will kind of go away to the private side. But it also acts as a nice little sink for that virtuous cycle of how tokens and currencies kind of work with that system, because it's another way for people to A, want more, to create more, and B, to also spend it as well and kind of keep things rolling along. Moving forward real quick, seamless AR and VR. People like to talk about AR is where you are. I'm going to modify or augment where I'm at, and VR is me being somewhere else remotely. But it doesn't always have to be a fantasy place like Mars. What if it's nothing more than the place that you're actually at? So if we started off with the real world in this conference room, and then the AR version is me having cool avatars and 3D stuff everywhere. But what if we took the floors, the walls, the ceiling, and basically all the 3D scanning that we would do here, and make a mirror virtual world of it, as well as a fantasy sort of whatever. We can now have a 3D environment in VR that somebody remotely can log into and have their avatar moving around, which we would see here in AR, because we know where the mapping is. And then conversely, they would see avatars of us in that VR sort of environment. And while it maybe sounds a little boring or trivial, it's actually very powerful, because now you're letting people log into some other location and interact with the environment, the objects, the places, and the people, both up and down. So like in an education perspective, let's say you have a child with a learning disability or can't relate to adults very well. I could have a therapist or a teacher remotely log in, create an avatar of Dora the Explorer or something, and move around your living room and interact with your child, who now is somebody that they can relate to on their level, at their height, and really cool and engaging sort of perspective. Or it could be your favorite celebrity coming to sing you happy birthday. There's a lot of different varieties. We're also looking at adding geolocation to blockchain, some cross-platform transference, which is I think very, very important to things like Silica and C4D here. Is what happens if I find that Starbucks coffee cup and I want to give it to somebody in Snapchat, or pass it off to somebody on Facebook Instant Messenger, or let them use it and create something in their Second Life experience. It's one thing to recreate the 3D object, but more importantly, again, as a kind of an underlying fundamental thing for the next generation of the internet, is being able to have only one instance of it. One good example, if I make a document and I attach it to an email and send it to you and you download it and have it on your desktop, we basically created 4 copies of that email. There's the original, the one I attached, the one you received that you attached, and then the one you copied to your desktop. In cases like this here, we need to be able to ensure that there's only one copy of an object at any given time. So if I find it and pick it up off the ground, it's now in my inventory, it's not there anymore. If I send it to you through some other social media sort of channel, it needs to be deleted off of my system and created on your system. And again, all this needs to be tracked. So this is one area that we're looking at, and I think it's going to be very important. I've already touched a little bit on consumer-generated content, and of course, one of the other things that we're looking at, everybody keeps talking about the augmented reality cloud, or cloud this or cloud that. I think that someday, and probably in the relatively near future, most buildings will have their own cloud. We're looking at doing, I guess, XR servers, and the idea being location up as opposed to cloud down. And by kind of offloading some of the who's, what, and where, and what they're doing, and how, and when, and why, from a local sort of perspective, those local servers can be responsible for the 3D mapping, the privacy, what content is located where, who's talking to who, which simplifies a larger sort of system, and also gives whoever's hosting that server much more control over privacy, which is very important for a lot of enterprise type of clients, people who don't want 3D versions of their home plastered all over the internet. And when we do something like that, it makes it easier for us to go to consumers and say, hey, we want you to 3D model your house, you have full control over it, your friends come over, you can share your content. But now, because we have a nice happy little, where the floors and the walls and the ceiling are, we can give somebody a web interface with a 2-dimensional floor plan, and they can say, my Amazon Alexa is here, my smart TV is here, my cool refrigerator is over here. And so by knowing where these positions of these things are, we actually don't have to have a whole lot of heavy-duty computer vision processing on a mobile device because we kind of know where it's located. So now we can do amazing things. So the next time an M&M commercial comes on, people whip out their phones. I know where the TV is in advance. I can have 3D M&Ms pop out of the TV and dance around the floor that the kids can then pick up. And then they can go somewhere and get a free bag of M&Ms. Or I can have a 3D version of Alexa walking around the house and, in a suit of armor. I mean, it doesn't matter. But we know where the Alexa is. We can do the data visualization over that. So there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of make the process simpler, to give people better experiences by looking at a lot of these technologies kind of together as an overall ecosystem. Yeah, there's my cool little geometric logo there. So I know I talked fast. I'm sure people have some questions. If not, I'm happy to get off the stage because I'm an introvert, if you all hadn't noticed. Any questions, criticisms, comments? Is my tie straight? I don't know sometimes. Okay, so by the resounding silence, I'm going to assume that I've completely oh, there's a question. So the question is about the previous and current trends of VR. Do you mean like industries as a whole? Okay. A couple things. So obviously the hardware is different and better. But having said that, it strikes me a little bit that a lot of people are rediscovering and reinventing things that were already done, 15 or 20 years ago, which is kind of cool and not depressing. But I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, it's the momentum and the amount of capital that's going in is a lot different. And I think that there's so many larger companies that are doubling down or tripling down on VR and AR. Facebook is a good example, so Snapchat. I think that even though there's still a lot of issues and missing use cases, we're going to get there, and the momentum is there to finally build the thing.
I feel like one of the things that's been holding back the technology for virtual reality and augmented reality is really having the form factors and the experience that consumers would want and would be comfortable for them. Could you talk a little bit about where you see that going and what would be required to have a consumer experience that everyone around the country is sharing in?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I have a couple answers. So the first thing I would say is that I believe that ultimately the hardware and a lot of the software that would run on devices is going to become a commodity. A lot of people are fighting over who's got the better head-mounted display or whatever now. I think in 3 or 5 or even 7 years, it's going to be so generic. It's like trying to buy a mug when you go to the mall. There's like 1,000 different whatevers. So that's number one. And number two, the form factor has to, for at least for augmented reality, it's got to be a pair of sunglasses. If I don't look as cool and as light and as hip as a pair of Oakleys, then we're doing it wrong. Now, granted, there's a lot of tech that has to go into something like that that's complicated, not easy to do, so we're still a few years off. I think we'll ultimately get there, and there's a lot of good companies like I know Vue6 is probably a good one that's really trying to push the curve and kind of get there. As far as user experiences go, I think honestly there's still a lot that can be done with handheld devices. The installed user base for mobile phones or tablets that can run ARKit or ARCore is over 600 million now. It'll be 1 billion by the end of this year, and it's going to keep growing from there. So I think that developers should look at how do I make great experiences and great user interfaces and great content that work well on a handheld and ultimately work well on a wearable display. And I think if you design it that way, where you're not really reliant on one or the other, your end experience will be much better. As for VR, yeah, that's really kind of hard. There's been a lot of really great advancements there. I remember back in the days when I would put one on and like 3 minutes later I'd be puking just out of the nausea and the vertigo. One thing as a personal thing I'd like to throw out there is please make sure that whatever HMD you develop for VR has got individual controls for both eyes. I see differently out of my 2 eyes, and there's nothing more irritating than putting on something that's supposed to be 3D, that it's not quite 3D, and I can only see half of the text in focus because there's not enough of a range to modify in the other one.
So we have time for one more question, but I'm going to throw in a half a question in there.
Okay.
Do you define virtual reality by the head-mounted display from the Facebook marketing, or do you define virtual reality by the virtual reality universe? Which one do you define it by? Because flat screen interfaces, or does it have to be a head-mounted display?
That's kind of like saying, do I define traveling by the road and the trip or by the car that I'm driving in? So it kind of depends. I think the question you're trying to get to, I'd go for more for the environment and the experience. As hardware is new and whatever, the experiences just get better and more maybe immersive or cooler. But you know, there's only so long I can withstand standing in a photorealistic environment without something to do. And I think this is one of the failings of the industry right now is they're not really pushing the experience or even the potential of what VR can do. It's about immersion and doing something somewhere else. It's not about taking something that you've already built and just slapping a head-mounted display on it. And pet peeve, 360 video is not VR, just saying. But yeah, no, I don't really, I mean, the hardware is great, but I really define it based on the experiences and what you can do and where you can go.
I had one other question that came to mind, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, so if you don't want to answer this question, that's fine. But I kind of get from the spirit of your enthusiasm for this, you expect to have this augmented reality and virtual reality for everybody. But you mentioned just a second ago about puking and vertigo, and we know there's a segment of our population that has some disposition to not being able to consume that content, whether it's epilepsy or whatever those conditions may be. Is there ongoing research to address those type of things, or are those people just considered as outliers and they will never be able to consume the richness of that content?
That's a really good question. So I think to some small degree they are outliers because it's not a majority of the population. Having said that, I know there's people like me that have some issues, and there's a good number of independent researchers that's their area of interest. They try to make things easier and better. You know, so in my case, you know, I've had a cataract and a detached retina in this eye. My optic nerve's a little damaged. I got blind spots everywhere. And now I've got, I guess it's called exotropia or something, where my left eye wanders to the left a little bit. So I'm actually wearing a Fresnel prism to help kind of correct that, so I don't fall over, you know, when I walk around. So I don't go see 3D movies. I can't, the flickering doesn't work for me. It's a huge waste of time. So I'm so thankful for the industry for having the non-3D version of all the movies I want to see, right? And then the other thing that's really, really, really difficult for me and a lot of people is low contrast stuff. I will murder any web designer that sends me a link where the text is light gray 5% on a white background. It's, you know, no, I will find you and I will hurt you. And I think that's also a potential problem when we're developing AR and VR by people that are, you know, fresh out of school or really haven't put a lot of thought into design, or the budget wasn't there to have a good UX guy or UI guy come in. Just common mistakes. You throw together a crappy PowerPoint, you're done. But there's actually an art and a science to what people see and how they interact with it. So I think smarter companies are going to pay more attention to those outliers because it'll ultimately make the rest of their product much better.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Rob Rice.